In this video, you'll learn 4 tactics that will help you bring your projects to a close. So if you suffer from acute, unfinished project syndrome, this is definitely for you. What's up everybody, Magda Ali, Hack the Matrix. Smash that subscribe button and hit the red bell so you get notified when I release more on how to enhance your brain to become more creative, innovative, and entrepreneurial in the way you live, work, and play. I discovered the recipe to always finishing my projects back in May 2020 after 2 decades of putting off my dream project. You see, ever since I was a defiant emo of a teenager, listening to the likes of Nirvana, Cypress Hill, and 9 Inch Nails, I had yearned to write, record, and film a video clip for a track of my own making. Fast forward 2 decades, and I still couldn't sing, didn't understand the methods of music production, and didn't have the slightest clue as how to film a music video. And then suddenly, with the touch of a magic wand, the impossible happened. I wrote my own lyrics, recorded the vocals, and made a video clip. Now, in this episode, I'll show you what changed in my approach that allowed me to finally tick off my way past the expiry date project. I've always had issues with executing on my creative projects. I've actually got a big fat notebook filled with brilliant ideas that are just rotting away in a cobweb-filled drawer that I even forget that I have. Now, I'm great at pulling rabbits out of a hat, but not so good at making rabbit pate, if you get my drift. But I digress. Since you've clicked on this video, you probably belong to the extensive group of people who don't finish what they start. Unless you've clicked on this video because you're a mate and I begged you on Facebook, then cheers. But if you are in that first group, then perhaps that cul-de-sac that you keep getting yourself into, this thing that results in unfinished projects leering at you from over the horizon of life, maybe it's stopping you from becoming who you want to be or doing what you really want to do in life. I mean, deep inside, you know you're fully capable, but because you're approaching the matter from a flawed angle, you're depriving yourself of the dopamine-dripping evidence of your genius. And then there's nothing to write home about, and that hurts. Maybe you've been trying to write that book, sell it, and then go live with shamans in Siberia, or you wanted to try your hand at painting because you always thought that Picasso was overrated, or maybe you just want to get that online business off the ground, but for some reason you're stuck on the branding and things are going nowhere because of that. If you're anything like me, you throw yourself wholeheartedly into a project full of fire and energy, but then as you proceed to take action, the sheer amount of choices you have at your disposal simply stop you in your tracks. They paralyze you. And this brings on overwhelm, despondence, and the inevitable abandonment of your sad, unfinished project. And if that's you, then listen good. Dr. Magda will tell you where stuff's at. So you're suffering from analysis paralysis. Now, apart from sounding groovy and being fun to say, analysis paralysis ain't no party that you want to be invited to. Who am I channeling here? In order to make an accurate diagnosis, answer the following questions. Do you ever find yourself standing in the cornflake aisle for 15 minutes because it is absolutely crucial that you read all the product labels in order to carry out a solid, thorough comparison of all available options, instead of just, picking something based on brand sentiment or price? Have you ever left a restaurant because the menu was just too long? Or have you turned on your console wanting to play a new game but realized that there were so many options simply at the stage of building your character that you just gave up altogether? Or have you ever turned off Netflix because an hour had already gone by and you had still not chosen anything and were still stuck reading reviews? Well, if you've answered yes to more than one of these questions, then chances are that, sorry to have to break it to you, the test result for analysis paralysis has come back positive. The digital revolution has given us access to an infinite amount of possibilities, all for the taking. Uncle Google is always available to accommodate your curiosity so you can diligently compare, analyze, and update your knowledge of all available options so you can make the perfect decision. In the good old days, you were at the mercy of what your corner store stocked up on. You watched what was on telly, listened to the radio, and you chatted with the peeps that happened to be around, Now you can buy traditionally picked spices straight out of Gambia. You could watch any film that has ever seen the light of day, and you can pour your heart out to whoever you can lay your hands on online, any stranger, whoever. And that's exactly why finishing projects in the past was considerably easier. These days, without an anti-analysis paralysis shield, your project ain't going nowhere. Just wrap your head around this. If analysis paralysis makes you leave a restaurant because their selection is too broad, or you don't buy anything in a shop, or you abandon playing a video game, just think about the extent that it affects something as difficult as closing your project, which by definition is characterized by delayed gratification, mind you. So if a brilliant VIP lounge of experts working day and night on steering your consumer behavior is waving a white flag, what chances have we, mere mortals, of closing and finishing our projects? Just to raise the stakes, imagine the consequences of analysis paralysis during special military missions, where, say, a Navy SEAL officer has split seconds to make the right decision with hundreds of variables, to shoot or not to shoot, to throw that grenade or not. That is the question. Or what about Formula One drivers? Do you think that Lewis Hamilton has time to reflect upon whether to take a sharp turn or a wide one? Dragging one's feet in the decision-making process here can result in a bitter defeat, or even worse, death, or, as is often the case in our experience, in an unfinished project. So it turns out that imposing limitations on your project greatly increases the chances of reaching the finish line. So good limitations reduce the amount of choices you have at your disposal, and this in turn reduces analysis paralysis. So that means that the probability of you completing your project also increases. Orson Welles once said that the enemy of art is the absence of limitations. Wait a second, but isn't freedom in art or in technological innovation an integral part of the process? In order to convince you that it ain't, imagine that you are to invent something. It can be anything, from whatever, of any shape or any size, serving any purpose. Now, creative freedom sounds great, but only on paper. So if you're like most people, this task will brutally overwhelm you. Where do you start, since you have no point of reference whatsoever? Limitless freedom isn't always beneficial. In reality, every project is limited by many factors, such as budget, available materials, the laws of physics, and if need be, if you have access to specialist skills or resources that you potentially need to close your project. So let's say that I decided to make a Titanic remake. I'd probably be facing some substantial problems with locating a ship to rent of that size, and CGI ain't that cheap to outsource either. So this would definitely be a project that I wouldn't invest myself in, because by definition, it would be out of my budget. For now, unless you have some spare cash lying around, then
give me money.
DM me. Anyway, these factors are what you would call creative limitations, the driving force in all domains of life. So imagine what they could do for your project. Now, eons later, I'll finally tell you what the 4 types of limitations that you can impose on your projects are. The first limitation is quite straightforward because it's all about limiting the amount of time you devote to something. So setting strict deadlines for tasks or project stages. In my experience, when it came to uni or other bigger professional obligations, nothing spurred me to action quite like the looming deadline. See, it even sounds morbid.
Deadline.
Time limitations work wonders, and you can literally impose them onto any project. And the best thing is that by definition, they also limit the amount of options you can flirt with. This means that automatically your brain gears into an optimized decision-making mode. It lets you make better decisions in shorter bursts of time for each stage of your project. And that's just the way your brain works. It loves a little bit of, adrenaline associated with a perceived risk of not delivering on time. You necessarily are forced to choose the first available option that meets your criteria. And you know what? That first option is usually more than enough to meet your demands or the requirements of your project. What's more, that other, better option down the line probably won't actually result in a better end product, but finding it will definitely suck up your time and energy, potentially even leading you to abandon a project due to overwhelm. Another advantage is that when time is treading on your heels and breathing down your neck, you start, by default, making more intuitive decisions, deprived of analytical sabotage. And this unpleasant situation actually stimulates creativity. Now, I experienced this firsthand. There was this challenge going around the internet and I was nominated.
Hot 16 Challenge 2.
So far, the closest I had come to making music was lying in my headphones and singing along, and suddenly, Magda, just do it. You've got 72 hours. And maybe it ain't of the highest quality, but I did it. I did the impossible. And the sheer amount of pride, dopamine, and satisfaction I got from this is just impossible to put into words. There was a limited time frame, and I wrote out each stage and knew exactly how long I had to make each decision. And I also knew that my mates were counting on me, so that was also an additional dose of motivation. As a matter of fact, if you have difficulty setting deadlines for yourself, then find some form of accountability partner. You can tell your sister or your uncle that you'll give them a tenner for every day that you are late at delivering, or commit to having to post a self-deprecating Facebook status. I didn't deliver on ABC because I XYZ, and there state your culprit. There's also loads of great accountability apps if you prefer to cut the human factor out of the equation. I get ya, you cyborg. Anyway, these apps are great for raising awareness around exactly what it is that is stopping you from getting stuff done. However, it's important to remember that there are some projects where imposing time limitations isn't going to work. Some tasks require you to mull over certain aspects or just need some breathing space. This is especially relevant for, activities like sculpting, painting, or creative programming. Limiting the amount of time that you dedicate to a project or a certain stage of the project really helps you tap into that brain mode where you intuitively make really good decisions because you don't have the time to mull over all available options. Now, we rarely trust this mode, and that's a big mistake because we're depriving ourselves of the evidence that we need to keep going. Someone wise once said, work expands to the time allowed for it. The wise guy that said this is Mr. Parkinson, but not the one that the disease is named after. His theory shows that employees who have a set time to complete a task will complete it at the latest possible time. So it turns out that if you have more time than you actually need, your efficiency decreases. Turns out it's better to schedule less time for a task and focus ruthlessly on the task at hand, only engaging in actions that will allow you to finish a given stage of a project. So always begin with the end in mind. What do you need to have to be able to close this stage of the project?
Always be closing. Always be closing.
Reduce the time allocated to a given stage, set concrete time limitations, and perfection. Done is better than almost perfect. Let me know in the comments about what your main motivators are. Is it a looming deadline or the perceived disappointment of those involved? Or perhaps financial penalties or something else? This brings us to the second limitation, which is limitation of scope. It's extremely beneficial to commit to smaller projects, which by definition have a limited scope, even if at first glance they don't feel ambitious enough, because it all boils down to automating the smaller steps, oiling the rusty hinges, or creating well-trodden paths to streamline the process. We often look with envy at prolific writers or directors and wonder how the hell they were able to get their heads around these massive projects with these broadest imaginable scopes for which they needed countless skill sets. Well, you know what? The answer to that question is micro projects. Micro projects that helped them hone individual skills. And the thing is, you can embrace the same attitude when it comes to your own projects. All you have to do is change the perspective with which you view each project. So when you commit to a humongous project, which is to constitute your life's work, your magnum opus, you probably need like a whole army of skills to execute on your project. And no, 300 Spartans aren't enough. And they're usually skills that you haven't mastered yet. And that causes the overwhelm because you don't know where to start, how much time to dedicate to each skill, and how much is enough for a given stage of your project. So when you commit to micro projects, they become your boot camp, your safe experimental battlefield where you can focus on honing your skills, each one at a time, step by step, until you master them enough to be able to perform them comfortably. Then, and only then, can you think about unleashing whole galaxies of such skills for bigger and more complex projects. And that's the way that the prolific writers and directors do it. It isn't until later on in their careers that they have built up impressive enough skill sets to allow them to create their masterpieces. Forgive the cliche, but Rome wasn't built in a day. Couldn't stop myself. So the way I executed on my internet challenge was by dividing my project into 4 micro projects, which helped me considerably reduce the scope of the giant project. First of all, I was to find a beat that I liked, write the lyrics, record the vocals, and make the video clip. After each session of working on my micro project, I knew exactly what progress had been made and if I had completed the given stage and whether I could move on to the next. Summing up, in order to limit the scope of your massive, humongous, monstrous project, break it down into stages or micro projects. So each stage serves the purpose of mastering a given skill and completing a stage of the project. So this will give you the clarity of mind to focus on a single task, and what's more, it will help you build an action plan, which is measurable and satisfying. Because we humans, we need to see progress. Otherwise we lose interest, we lose motivation. We're like, next. Let me know in the comments how you can break down a project that you are currently working on into small, edible chunks. The third limitation is the limitation of tools. And once again, I'll use my own example with that challenge that I mentioned earlier. So living in the digital era, I had a whole ocean of beats, loops, samples at my fingertips, a million possibilities of how my track could sound. And as you already know from the beginning of this video, cosmic variety ain't very good for your mind. Maybe it's like thinking about infinity. That stuff can drive you mad. So when I was trying to get my challenge done, or at least the first stage of it, I was totally overwhelmed with the amount of possibilities I had. I sat there staring at the screen blankly for hours, and I was completely paralyzed, unable to choose any track to kick shiz off. And it was there and then that I decided to impose a limitation of tools on my search for the perfect track. I made up my mind to only use 2 platforms to find what I was looking for, nothing more. I also knew that the track had to be slow, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do the vocals. So I implemented yet another limiting criteria. Do you see where I'm going? The next thing I was forced to admit, though it was hard, I knew that I wouldn't be able to learn to sing or rap in a couple of hours. So I chose mellow recital for my vocal style. Choosing mellow recital was a limitation that came from my knowledge of my personal skill set restrictions in this area. And as far as the video clip was concerned, I gave myself a 5 localization limit to filming the actual thing. So only 5 places. Now this helped me move forward as the amount of decisions I had to make had by default been limited to a minimum. Another interesting phenomenon was that limiting the tools that I gave myself permission to use led me to coming up with more creative solutions. Need is the mother of invention, as they say. When you don't have a lot of resources, you tend to get really innovative with the ones that you do have. An interesting fact, even Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, claims to only make 3 decisions per day. He says that this is the basis for making quality decisions. And the thing is, in the modern age, you're actually daily forced to make around 35,000 decisions. Way too much. And that's probably why Steve Jobs wore the same thing every day and why Leonardo da Vinci gave up on washing and changing altogether. Maybe that's a way forward. The final limitation is the undo option limitation. Now, in the age of digital writing, graphic design, or music making software, there's a double-edged sword called Ctrl-Z, the much-loved undo option. Oh, you made a mistake? Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because in modern times, the concept of making a mistake has all but disappeared. You can fix and revisit everything to add those final finishing touches that turn into a never-ending story. I like to call this the onset of perfection psychosis. The very awareness that you can use the undo option to your heart's content actually has very serious repercussions. It means that you can't access the most efficient brain states that you have been hardwired to use when things get tough. Evolution has equipped you with an amazing cocktail of neurotransmitters that basically give you superpowers when certain circumstances are met. These neurotransmitters allow you to hack into your most creative, eloquent, efficient self. But in order for them to get released into your organism, you need to feel slightly stressed, a bit worried, slightly nervous that you'll let someone down or that you'll stain your good reputation. So in other words, the stakes need to be high for you to be able to access your superpowers. This is called positive stress or a flow state. So when you feel that you can lose something that you hold dear, your body pulls out the big guns for the occasion. It's actually really hard to get yourself into this state these days, and the undo option can answer for that. I mean, imagine the stress that musicians had to go through in the past when they wanted to record an entire album. Not only did an hour of studio time cost incredible sums of money, but to make things worse, if they made a single mistake, they had to start from the very beginning. Methods of post-production where you could just cut out any error simply didn't exist. Or what about writers using typewriters? You make a mistake, you type up the whole page again, mister. Computers revolutionized this, as you can delete and undo at will. So when you use digital tools to create anything, you have unlimited undos and redos at your fingertips. Now that's some badass analysis paralysis, if you ask me. If you really want to get yourself into that efficient brain mode, commit to only using the undo option 3 times for each new element that you write or create. Or maybe you can change the keyboard shortcut for undo to at least use it in a more mindful way. So these 4 limitations will allow you to finish your projects as they naturally restrict our human tendency for perfection.
Always be closing. Always be closing.
And apart from that, they create a powerful anti-analysis paralysis shield, because you save yourself the daunting task of making countless decisions just to close your project. Because as it turns out, finishing a project is a long string of decisions and choices, and getting rid of analysis paralysis will additionally reward you with increased sources of creativity, innovative solutions, and most importantly, will get you closing those projects. Always be closing. Always be closing.